What's the nature of your emergency?
Good morning, police, fire, military, and families, and to everybody who is listening in on the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Welton, and I do want to preface today's episode by saying that we are going to be talking about the very sensitive topic of a fallen officer. So good morning. That is just a warning ahead of time. I'm excited to introduce to you guys Miss Susan Snow. Susan, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being as patient as you have been in waiting to come on to be able to do today's interview. I know that the show's always booked out for quite a while, so I definitely appreciate your patience. And Susan is the author. I was just talking to her about her book cover, and she is the author of a book called The Other Side of the Gun. And we're going to kind of dive into how that whole concept came into fruition. We are going to be doing a giveaway, which I tend to forget about at the beginning of these. We have an Easter gift box bundle to whoever comments the most within the next 24 hours. So if you guys have any questions as we're going along, you can go ahead and drop them down below. Susan is also inside of our Facebook group. If you're listening to this on the podcast or over on YouTube, you can join the Police, Fire, Military, and Families Facebook group for exclusive access and for a chance to win our giveaways. Susan, thank you again for coming on. And I want you to be as comfortable and as vulnerable as you're willing to be when it comes to discussing this topic. I know I shared with you that there are many people inside of our Facebook group who could relate to a lot of what you have to share. So I just want to thank you again for that. And just tell us a little bit about who you are.
Right now.
Wherever you want to start.
Let's see. I have been with my husband for 38 years, going on 39 years, which is crazy. And I have 3 kids, and I'm not going to go over their ages because it makes me feel old.
I was just going to say, 38 years, you do not look like you're old enough to have been married for 38 years. So
thank you. We've been together from the very beginning. So I was 17 and he was 19, and it had only been 3 months that we were dating when my dad was killed. So he's been with me this whole time. So this hasn't been just my journey. It's been his as well.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I'll just give you a very short form of what happened. At 17, my dad was a Los Angeles police detective. And, him being a detective, I had a false sense of security with that. When he was on the streets, there was always that fear of like something happening. I never thought about death because I was so young. But I always thought, there was a chance that Daddy could get hurt. And when he became a detective, I was much older. And so I had a false sense of security. And he and I were very close. My dad was a very, very present person. No matter where he was, whether it was at work or at home, he was just very present in your life. Like he, made sure that he listened to you and was there for you. And on Halloween night, I was getting ready for, I wanted to go to a party, and he and I had fought about it in the morning. And I was bound and determined to win that argument. So all day I was just scheming on, how I can manipulate my parents into letting me go to this party. And so my mom had just come home from work, and I was getting ready for Halloween, and the phone rang. And being a teenager, I just thought, who else is going to call my parents? It's got to be for me, right? So I ran to the phone and picked it up, and it actually was not for me. It was a woman from my brother's school. And my dad had been picking up my brother from school that night. And all she said was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. And immediately my mom had rounded the corner and I handed her the phone. And I was kind of sort of listening in on what she was saying or what the woman was saying on the other line. And I could just see my mom's posture changing. Um, she got off the phone. She looked at me and said, "We're going to the school." And so we got in the car and we drove to the school. It was about 7 minutes from our home. And when we got there, we had no idea what we were coming up against. So when we got there, parked the car, and in the beginning, in the front of the school is not where the kids got picked up. It was in the back of the school. And so we started heading towards the back of the school and noticed an ambulance and police officers were walking around and they had tears in their eyes. And as I rounded the corner, my mom and I both saw my dad's truck. And so we started making a beeline for the truck. And that's when we witnessed his body in the aftermath. And a police officer automatically grabbed my mom and held her back. It was a horrific sight. And at 17, I couldn't wrap my head around what I was seeing.
Yeah, I can imagine something like that happening. And there's a lot that is coming up for me wanting to know situational wise, but I'm going to pick up your book so that I can maybe educate myself a little bit further on that. But for the sake of today's episode, how did the dynamics of things in your family change after this happened?
I think the hardest thing for me is that I really wasn't. I had kind of a very complicated relationship with my mother. And my dad was always like kind of the go between. He was the voice of reason. And so for me, I was trying to navigate this night, and I didn't know where my brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt. I knew nothing. And they brought us to a office at the school. And my mom kind of went off, I believe, with some detectives. And I sat there and two women were talking. And it was the first time that someone had ever said that my dad, or that I had heard that my dad was gone. Because I, in my brain, kept thinking, oh my gosh, why is the ambulance not helping him? And then when I heard that, when I knew it was real, I wanted my mom, right? I wanted that family unit. And she came to me and said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." So I was really, every part of my being wanted to run out of there and just keep running away. But the other part of me was 17 years old and I was a kid. And I wanted my mom and my brother, and I wanted to know that I had support, that I wasn't alone in it. So I did go to a neighbor's house, and I did have to navigate all of this stuff kind of on my own. And, still wondering, did my brother get hurt? Like, why aren't they telling me anything, So it was just, it was very difficult. It was a very difficult, and I'm not blaming her because, there was so much chaos and things going on and whatever, but what it ended up doing is making me feel like I wasn't important, and I had 17 years with him. He was my best friend. We had a very, great relationship, and now he's gone. And now I have to navigate this. Like, how do I have a relationship with my mom?
Yeah, that changes everything. When it comes to the dynamics then of things in your household, how were you able to cope with things? Everyone's saying good morning to you. How were you able to cope with things thereafter?
I didn't. I didn't have the tools, um, I think at the time and so be it, because my dad was killed in front of my brother, who was 6 years old at the time. And my dad's last heroic thing that he did on earth was to save him. And so obviously all of the focus was on him and my mom. And I got kind of pushed aside. Even the media didn't know that he had a teenage daughter for 2 days. So I wasn't handling it. I went into a deep depression, even though I didn't know what that was. I had anxiety because the one person I felt safe with was now gone.
Somebody says here, glad you are sharing this with everybody. I know how hard this is for you. I'm not sure who said that, but I think it's somebody who can 100% relate with your exact story. Oh my God, I can't believe that you had to find out this way, Susan. This is just wrong. It's adding insult to injury. Yeah, I'm just putting myself in the mind of a 17-year-old girl, because I too am a daddy's girl. And I can't even fathom having those dynamics shift in that way. Very comparable to you with your mom. I wasn't as close with my mom. And you had made mention of the fact that you didn't have the tools to be able to cope. So was there ever any kind of help or like psychotherapy or anything that you had gotten?
Well, you got to understand, this was 1985. And back then, there was no talk about mental health. There were no resources for kids. And I just thought if you went to therapy, it was because you were crazy. So when LAPD came to us and said, we want to pay for a therapist, at the time, I was just doing what everybody told me to do. That was my coping mechanism. So I did go to a therapist. And the entire year, this therapist, all of our sessions were very shallow. It was always about my relationship with my mom, my boyfriend in school, and my relationship with my brother. And that's it. Not once did this man in an entire year, and I tell people this all the time, and they're like, oh, what? Not once did he ask me how that night affected me. We never dove. He never asked. And as the year progressed, the depression was deep. And at that point, I went into suicidal ideation, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't recognize that I was in trouble, nor could I verbalize it. And so, for a year, every session before I'd go, I'd be like, oh, today's the day he's going to fix me and make me feel better. Right. And it didn't happen. And after a year, he looked at me and said, Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady, and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore. And I was a hot mess, like a hot mess. And I had no tools. I had nothing to be able to handle all of these, the panic attacks at night, the anxiousness, the depression, the suicidal ideation, all of that. And my boyfriend couldn't, deal with it. I mean, he was 19 years old. Most guys would have hightailed it out of there the minute it happened, but he didn't. And he was the only saving grace for me at that time, because at least I was able to talk to him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot, though. Like, there was a lot of things that he didn't even know 38 years later. He read it in my book.
Oh.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a very different time back then.
Yeah, sorry about all the typos. Still trying to wake up. Okay, I'll try to translate here. Ours was back in 1983, and there was no mention of PTSD back then. I think even orders of any kind of therapy. My mom turned to Christianity for help. Yes, thank you for sharing that. So, Susan, you're here, and you're a public speaker now, and you are an author, and you're seemingly happy. You have this long-term marriage, and we were talking a little bit before we started going live. So, in saying that, what was that turning point for you?
Oh my gosh, that didn't happen for 14 years. Um, my turning point, unfortunately, was another traumatic experience. When we moved from Southern California to Colorado, we'd been here 2 years. And in 1999, the Columbine shootings happened. And remember, I've been told this whole time, that I was fine and I was a well rounded person. So when I was working at as a hairdresser at the time, I went into the back to take a break and turned on the TV that day. And it was at the school. So I was seeing everything on the news coverage like everybody else. However, I was having PTSD, which I didn't know, rear its head. And so when I was watching all of these scenes and the kids were around my same age and all the police officers and the ambulances, all these things, I started having flashbacks of that night. And I couldn't understand what was happening to me at all. So I had panic attack. I turned white as a ghost. I was shaking. I never told people my story. I figured when we moved here that they didn't need to know.
Mm.
So nobody knew what was happening to me, nor did I. And everybody kept asking me if I lived in the area because clearly I was not old enough at the time to have kids that went there. And I said, I have no idea what's happening. And what I did was I ended up doing what I always did. And I put what I call the emotional mask on. The mask of, I'm fine. This isn't affecting me. I'm going to compartmentalize this and I'm not going to deal with this. And I'm going to go about my day, do my clients, and just get out of here. And I'm sure all of this will go away, kind of thing. The problem is it didn't go away. And at this point, I'm married and I have children and I'm terrified because now I'm spiraling. And I don't want to take my life, but I do want to take my life. It's a weird area, a weird space to be in. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't for my husband who met me at the door and said, this was a couple days later, he said, you have two choices. You either get help or I'm putting you in a hospital. Because he even recognized that I was spiraling. And I did. I went to a doctor who put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he said, and now you need to seek therapy. I was like, wait a minute. That didn't happen for me 14 years ago. What makes you think it's going to happen now? Well, thank God I did. Because when I did seek this particular therapist, she dealt with severe PTSD and severe trauma. And so when I met her, I told her 5 minutes. I met with her for 5 minutes. And she looked at me and she said, everything you've gone through since you were 17 years old is 100% normal. And you have PTSD. But then I was confused because I thought, wait, I'm not in the military and I didn't go to war. And she said, no. She said, anyone who witnesses anything, has any kind of trauma, can experience PTSD. But what you need to know is that PTSD is not something that goes away. It's something you learn to manage. And that was the beginning. That was such a relief for me because all these years, I just thought I was crazy, that I had snapped, that there was no hope for me, and that I was not, this is the way I was going to have to live my life forever and ever and ever. And it was frustrating because I felt like I was not like my dad. I was not able to be present 100% because I had all this internal stuff going on. So yeah, that was definitely my turning point for sure. And I always describe it as like the sky opened up and rainbows shot out because I had answers.
You were so deserving after so so much of, we could call it failure now, but back then, of course, as you said, we didn't have these types of resources, tools, and knowledge that we do now. I call it the pressure cooker syndrome. You let it build up inside, eventually the valve will open to release all the steam. Good for her to get treatment. Yes, 100%. So Susan, how has your life changed since that moment?
Oh my gosh. It has been amazing because each thing that I learned, and she started me out with something as easy and as simple, and anyone can do it. And I always tell people, like, I know this sounds la and whatever, but I'm going to tell you right now that journaling was the first thing that she had me do. And I did it at night. And the reason I did it at night is because I didn't sleep. And so she just said, I want you to get whatever is in your brain and put it on paper. But, journaling can be writing, but it can also be music. It could be art. It could be whatever it is that you need to do to get whatever is out of your head out. And so she said, give it a week, just give it a week. And so I did, and it made a huge difference. And so that made me know that I was safe with her, and that no matter what areas she started to push me into, that I had that trust that she was going to be able to come alongside me and support me. Um, and so I've done all kinds of cognitive therapies throughout the years. And in doing that, it just opened my mind to the healing that needed to happen. The book is what really pushed it over the edge for me. And part of that book, and the reason I wrote it, is because I wanted to tell my story, obviously, because the little girl who was 17, who didn't get to tell her story way back when, is now able to. And I was mentally capable of going back there and feeling everything I felt, because it took me 4.5 years to write it, because I had to dive and relive and re-experience all of the emotions so that I could take you on my journey with me. And so in doing that, I had a lot of fear. But what I did was I put the people's faces that I knew that with my experience and my words, that could help others who were struggling and who are hurting and who needed to know that you can find resiliency. And a lot of it was because there's Leo family out there that is still hurting and reeling and angry about what happened to my father. And I thought, if I can heal my Leo family with this book, it's worth it. Like this, I wrote it for the other people. I wrote it so I could help others heal. I wrote it for other survivors, you know, and anyone who has had trauma and loss, to give them some hope and some healing and let them know that they're not alone. And, but you don't have to go through 14 years of struggling, the way I did. So, that's just kind of my message.
Yeah, it's such an inspiring one too. Susan, I've had PTSD since 1984. You do learn to manage it. I was not diagnosed until 2017. I jumped on late. What's the name of the book? Her book is called The Other Side of the Gun. I know I have it in my shopping cart on Amazon. Where else is it available, Susan?
It's you can get it on barnesandnoble.com and Amazon right now.
Amazon. Perfect. Well, one thing I want to point out before we hop off here, Susan, is you had that turning point. And I'm thinking about all of the people who may have experienced something comparable, be it law enforcement related or not, in the 1980s or thereabout, who maybe haven't had that turning point and might still be in that place of thinking that, they said this is just how I am and I have to just deal with this being how it is. And so I think it is such an inspiration and such a flashlight that is brightly being shown upon people who might be feeling that way, because we only know what we know. So
Right.
had you not had that experience that then took you to a different therapist who then shed light on the fact that, that this isn't how it has to be, although everything that has happened to you since then is completely normal, but here's the tools, right? So I think that it's incredible for you to be that voice, because I don't know of anybody else who is filling that particular space. So I just want to say that and say thank you to you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important. And I tell people all the time when we're talking about it, or if I'm coaching someone, I always say, it's really important for you to have that connection with your therapist. And it's also important for that therapist to know and be versed and educated on the particular trauma that you've experienced, right? So, and it's all about you. It's not about them. This is your healing journey. It's not their healing journey. So it's important for you to interview your therapist. Are they the right connection for you? Are they the right person? Because here's the thing, if you don't learn to be vulnerable and you don't have the trust in that person to be vulnerable with them, vulnerability is not a weakness, right? It's a strength. But at the same time, in order to be vulnerable, you need to have trust. You need to know that you can trust this person, that whatever you tell them, they're going to be able to guide you through it. So if you don't feel that way and you're sitting with your therapist or you've been with them for 5 sessions and you don't feel that, move on. Because otherwise the healing will not happen.
That is fantastic advice. I can't tell you how many people I have spoken to who have completely diverged from any kind of psychotherapy because they just think, oh, I went to a therapist once and it just doesn't work. So I really like that message. Thank you for telling your story. Thank you for your openness and your vulnerability. I would love to get your contact info if possible so I can talk to you sometimes. There are so many similarities and carries on today with me being medically retired as a law enforcement officer and going through years now of loss, rehab, and therapy. Yes, absolutely. I'm sure that Susan would be more than happy to have a conversation with you. To anybody who is wondering, again, the book is called The Other Side of the Gun. Susan does do public speaking, both in person and remote. I saw on your website, which I absolutely love the idea of that. You can reach out to Susan directly. Her website is susansnowspeaks.com. Susan, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and for sharing your story with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
911, what's the nature of your emergency?